Welcome to the ASME DSCD podcast series. My name is Selena Pan, and I will be hosting this month. Our guest is Dr. Carrie Bobier-Tiu. She is currently a senior manager at Woven Planet, which is a subsidiary of Toyota, and she heads the controls division. We have a bunch of interesting questions lined up for her today, and so I guess we'll jump right in. Welcome to the show, Carrie.
Thanks for having me, Selena.
Yeah, happy to have you. So in terms of your storied research and personal career, how did you actually first decide that you wanted to go into the field of controls?
Yeah, I think it kind of started for me when I was in undergrad, and I was kind of looking for, as everyone does, an extracurricular activity on top of all of the mountains of classwork that we had. But I ended up kind of looking for something in the engineering field, and we had a solar car team at Stanford. So I joined that team when I was a sophomore and didn't really know anything going into it. I didn't have much like mechanical background other than like the interest in becoming an engineer and maybe a few classes under my belt. But the group there really like took me in, and I started to learn like what are all the parts of a suspension and how do you design one. And I was working with one of the grad students and ended up working with like going to my professor, Chris Gerdes, who ended up being my advisor all the way through that year through my Ph.D. I went to him for advice and just asked like, okay, what do I need to know about steering systems and suspension while we're designing the solar car? And so he started working with me, and I ended up sticking around in his lab for another 10 years. But that I think that initial activity is what got me into like vehicles inside of mechanical engineering to start with, because I had kind of gone into school thinking I wanted to do aerospace engineering. But that project on the solar car and the interactions I had with Chris Gerdes really put me down the path of like vehicle design, vehicle engineering. And once I started taking my first controls classes, I really fell in love with it pretty quickly, because I think it was mostly about understanding the physics of the system and being able to like influence that and act on it and kind of like work with the machine and understand how the motion of the system works. And I don't know, something about that is just kind of like fits together in my head. So yeah, I guess that's where I started.
So controls and vehicles kind of happened simultaneously for you then.
Yeah, and I think it was probably a lot of influence from landing in Chris's lab, and those are his areas of expertise, but I kind of found my way there and it was a good fit. So
yeah, and he still mentors you too, right?
Yeah, we have a really good relationship, and whenever I have a big career change or something or life events, he's one of the people on my board of directors, so to speak, that I'll go talk to.
That's awesome. I haven't heard of the concept of personal board of directors before, but I should probably use that myself too.
Yeah, well, I think that actually comes from the book Women of Influence. So that was one of the concepts that I pulled out of there, of like having a few people in your mind to have on your personal board of directors. Like, who are the people you go to for advice, especially in a career change, but you could have a life one too, right?
Well, I guess listeners don't know, but Carrie used to be my manager when we worked at the same company. So I would say that Carrie is actually on my personal board of directors.
Oh, thanks. Well, you might be on mine too, because we talk a lot about, giving advice for each other. So
mutually beneficial and enjoyable.
Exactly.
Yeah, so now that we know a little bit about how you came to be interested in vehicle control, we know you're an expert. So tell us a little bit about what's going on today. What are some of the main focus areas in vehicle controls?
Yeah, at least I can speak from my perspective and what I've had experience with and what I've seen. I think there are two big areas of work going on in vehicle control now, at least for kind of personally owned vehicles. There's also a lot of different things going into trucks and other things like that. But for personally owned vehicles, there's kind of the ADAS side of things, or the driver assistance systems and safety systems, active safety. And then there's the automated systems. So things like, full self-driving, or any of the kind of level 2 through level 5 systems that may be coming out on the market, or maybe kind of still that in that research phase. But for the ADAS and active safety systems, like, one of the things that I find really interesting is starting to bring the various pieces together, because each car often has many ADAS systems right now. So you might have like your ACC system, your cruise control system. You might have a stability control system. You might have a lane keeping support system. But what I'm interested in doing is really moving towards a more unified system for all of those things. So you have kind of one centralized controller, a unified controller that's taking care of all of those things in tandem. So you have a good trade-off when you're really coming up against a critical situation. So that's something that I think is also kind of happening around the industry, not just for controls, but for a lot of vehicle systems, of moving to kind of a centralized ECU system or a centralized approach. And so there's definitely a lot of work still to be done there, but I'm pretty excited to kind of be moving things in that direction. And then for the automated systems, there's like I guess a lot of different things that are still being researched and working on approach. But obviously, kind of for automated vehicle system, you need a steering output and like an acceleration output. So in that case, it sounds simple, but there's a lot of work around like, well, how do you make that the profile of those things feel good to the driver, and how do you handle things when the situation is not ideal, like maybe you run into actuator limits, or you end up in a situation where the vehicle is actually forced to do something a little more dynamic. Like, how do you handle those situations in a way that's holistic and utilizes the capabilities of the car without causing some kind of upstream problem in the automated system.
Mm-hmm. All right. So it sounds like there's going to be this movement towards having the whole be greater than the sum of the parts.
That's a good way to put it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And continuing to refine what happens, everything upstream of those two super important control inputs, mm-hmm. steering and acceleration.
Yeah.
So given that it seems like there are a lot of exciting areas to work on right now, if you were a student right now, say in grad school, thinking about your future, and you wanted to work in self-driving cars, what advice would you have for them? Anything from types of courses to take to maybe activities or clubs to participate in, even preparing for interviews. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's probably a wide variety of answers. For control engineer, I would highly recommend diving into like a little bit deeper into software engineering than most of us are encouraged to do in school. I think, at least from my experience, and even now what I see in interviews is a lot of control engineers come in without that software engineering background, which is fine because that's kind of like how the university system is right now, I guess. But the demands on a control engineer in the automotive industry right now are moving a lot more towards software engineering. The whole industry is moving towards software engineering. So for people who come in with C++ or even Python, they're going to have a lot easier time kind of assimilating than someone who's only used MATLAB, which I was totally in that boat myself. Maybe I think both of us were at some point in our lives, and we kind of had to learn how to pick up those software engineering skills. So I would definitely recommend that. Obviously, taking a lot of controls classes. I mean, I'm a big fan of nonlinear control, but I think what I've ended up using the most is a combination of nonlinear, classical, and optimal control for different purposes throughout my career in industry. And so having a little bit of a grab bag to pull from can help when you're trying to, especially when you're trying to work with a real physical plant. Sometimes you need to have a little bit of things like a notch filter or something to that effect where you can that you can pull out of your toolbox and use in certain situations. And then I think, always finding ways to grow leadership skills or personal development or teamwork. All of those things are really going to pay off in kind of the office as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of want to touch on two of those. Let's go backwards. So one thing I really enjoyed while I was on your team was the teamwork. And they don't really teach you that in school, except for maybe when you're in study groups or working on homework together. But I would say that everyone on our team was just really, really nice. And that was kind of how we made progress. Besides that, have there been, teamwork skills that maybe you could start building as a student?
That's a good question. For me, and especially having been in a management role now for a couple of years, the root of having that teamwork and having a good team dynamic is really trust and building up a space for the team where they feel like emotionally safe and able to speak up. And especially in a place like vehicle control, you have to have the safety culture as well, and the ability to trust in your team and make sure that everyone's going to make the decision that is safe, and but also kind of in an interpersonal level to make sure people are, feel that they can always come to you or express what they think is the right opinion, even if it goes against everyone else, and kind of foster that. So it's tough to know, like, where do you learn those things? But any place where you can work on a team, like I had the solar car team, like I said, when I was in school, and I think being on a team, and especially something when you're going through kind of like the adversity of like the solar car race, which for us was really difficult, you kind of get to see people at their worst, so to speak, like everyone's stressed out.
Yeah.
Sometimes work can be like that too, but you have to know how to kind of like conduct yourself and like get through those tough times together as a group. So I think anything where you're able to kind of like get into those larger group settings while you're a student, it gets you to have those interpersonal skills on a larger social group level in like a work setting. And also being able to kind of I think another thing that might help is kind of like a systems engineering approach to things as well. So especially as a control engineer, you're always going to be functioning at the level of the hardware, right? But you're also functioning at the software level. So it's kind of the bridge. And so what I found is you you end up working with a lot of cross-functional teams across their organization. Like you're not usually just working in a silo by yourself. So anywhere where you can kind of build up that systems thinking approach, I think will also help in the kind of like team building setting.
That's a really good way to think of it. I know I'm always thinking about systems now that I work in systems engineering, but I didn't really think of applying that to different units of people. The other part that I wanted to touch on was the aspect of software engineering for interviews. Like you mentioned, it's not quite in the university curriculum for control students, but I want to second that too. Carrie mentioned that she and I were in a similar boat, and I do think that self-driving is moving so quickly that maybe the expectations now have shifted even more towards having maybe more software experience than even we did 5-6 years ago. So I just wanted to emphasize that for any students listening.
Yeah, definitely. And we see that even in the interview processes too, where I do really keep it in mind that a lot of the people we're going to see for controls might not have that background, and try to kind of tailor the interviews a little bit for that expectation. But still, you want people to be able to function in an environment where they're going to be using C++ from day one. So it is kind of a fine line between, if someone has that experience, it's really going to give them a leg up.
Yeah. Yeah, so we were talking about what life was like as a student a bit and preparing for jobs, but there's more to life as a student or life as an employee than just your job task at hand. Especially nowadays when universities and companies are realizing the importance of DEI and having a more inclusive environment at work. And I wanted to know what are some of the types of actions and initiatives that you found most effective?
Yeah, I think I've been lucky in the last couple of years to be really involved in DEI with Toyota at Toyota Research Institute, and now starting at Woven Planet. But I think for me, the thing that has been the most effective, like to my personal life and career, has been involvement in the employee resource groups, not research groups. So at TRI, we really built up I think a really supportive set of resource groups. So we had things like an African diaspora ERG, we had a women's ERG, but for me personally, I ended up starting a parent ERG while I was there. And it was right before, it was a few months before COVID started that we started the ERG. And it was just a few of us, and we kind of started it because we had seen, like, as everyone knows, moms don't get a ton of support in our society, and we could all feel that at work. And we also saw that a lot of men in our work lives weren't necessarily taking their leave for when they had a child, and really want to kind of boost up the communication around like why it's important to take leave, why it's important to support women and moms at work, and also parents of any type. And then COVID hit, and all of the parents were really underwater. So it was actually a super important opportunity that we had to kind of start finding ways to help parents work through that. So I felt it was really fortunate that we had the first, like the whole employee resource group like infrastructure to build that, and the support of the leadership to build that. And yeah, so for me, that was a really important thing. And I found a lot of like personal growth from that, and I got a lot of support from that. And but some of the other things that I found on kind of like a less personal scale is really getting involved in like the interview pipeline processes and the hiring processes, and making sure that we were doing whatever we could to really have like, you know, have a diverse interview panel and have a diverse panel of interviewees for every position. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done there, but like I think Selena, you and I both sat on dozens of interviews at Toyota Research Institute because we were some of the only women there. But I think during our time there, we also saw a big growth in the number of women who were hired because we could sit on those panels and encourage people that, you know, there were people like them that they could come work with. So I think even it seems like a small thing to do, but it's actually a really big thing and a big step for a company to make to support that kind of thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we both have talked before about what a difference it makes when we've gone into interviews to see a more diverse panel and immediately feel a bit more comfortable with the setting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so I think that we are on to maybe our last topic, and it is a fun one. What books would you recommend to anybody listening, whether they are a controls person or just a passing interested party?
Yeah, I have a couple kind of like tech related books. So one of my favorite is Failure's Not an Option by Gene Kranz, and it's about the Apollo 13 missions. I don't know, it's a really cool dive into, you know, the engineering mindset and what was going on at NASA during that time.
Carrie actually bought that book for every single one of us on our team during COVID. So that's how much she loves that book.
And now all of you love it as well. Another one that I've read recently is called Loonshots, and it's kind of about the kind of big moonshots that are taken in a company that fail, and like why do they fail, and what are the patterns that approach in those things, and why do some of them eventually succeed after a certain magic number of times, and that kind of thing. So I thought it was interesting to see like how as a person who's in charge of making some big engineering decisions, like how can I use that knowledge to kind of push through the adversity of some of these new technologies and find the acceptance in them, hopefully eventually.
And why have both of us read it?
We have a common mentor who has told us to read it.
Yeah, the personal board of directors is very strong.
Yes. And another fun one that I have is I'm very into like Disney stuff and Imagineering. So there's a book called The Imagineering Workout where every page is a different Imagineer's favorite like brainstorming or creative activity. And so it's kind of fun to go through and just have those tools. It's good for any engineer, creative person.
Nice. Cool. What are you reading right now again about a first 90 days?
Oh yeah. So we were talking about this before we started, but I just am about halfway through this book called The First 90 Days, and it's about, you know, when you come into a new position in your career, or how do you handle navigating that first 3 months. And it actually has so far at least a lot of great tools that you can use to kind of figure out like, how do I build the new network that I need in the company? How do I start identifying like which problems need to be solved? And I think I would recommend it to anyone who's embarking on kind of a new career change.
Yeah, whether it's at a new company or a new role within your company.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that is the end of the questions I had set up for you, Carrie, today. I want to thank you so much for your time and sharing with us a lot of good advice and stories, and just a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks. Well, thanks for having me. And of course, I always love talking with you. So, and now everybody else gets to hear what we talk about,
Yes, this is mostly what we talk about. Work and stress and life. Yeah.
Yep, basically.
All right, thanks, and I will talk to you soon.
Great. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.